I'm going to talk about a piece of legislation that we're working on right now that we really hope that the folks in this room, the organizations in this room, can help support. It's called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. And what this bill would do would allow judges to have discretion during the sentencing phase. Right now, the way that the judicial system works in New York State, and probably most of the country, is that judges are forced to sentence people within certain guidelines that exist in the statute. So regardless of whether there was abuse in the crime, in the acts that took place, those mitigating factors can't be taken into account when a judge sentences a person. So what this bill would do would allow judges to go outside of the regular sentencing scheme and say, okay, if the abuse was directly related to the alleged crime, then the judge can sentence a woman to shorter sentences, and in some cases, probation and alternative to incarceration programs, which is what we really advocate for. Alternatives to incarceration, or ATIs, I always have a hard time saying that, are very rare, and there's actually only one in the entire country that's focused specifically on survivors of abuse, and that's Steps to End Family Violence, where Sharon and Jasenia work, that you heard from yesterday. The second part of this legislation would be for our sisters who are still currently incarcerated. We can't forget about the women who are there, who are spending years, sometimes decades, in prison for protecting themselves. So the bill would allow incarcerated women and men who are survivors to apply to the courts for resentencing and hopefully come home sooner. The three eligibility factors for people to be able to either get home or get resentenced sooner is that you have to be a survivor of violence at the time that the crime was committed. The second factor is that the abuse has to be a significant contributing factor to the crime. And the third is that the judge has to find that sentencing a person under the regular guidelines would be unduly harsh. So this is our bill. This is our legislation. Why is it important? Well, right now there is an exception that exists in New York State. It's called the Jenna's Law exception. In 1998, under a very conservative governor, New York passed the Sentencing Reform Act, otherwise known as Jenna's Law. This made all violent crimes become determinate flat sentences. That means instead of having an indeterminate sentence of, say, 5 to 15 years or 15 years to life, you would get a flat sentence of 8 years or 10 years or 15 years. This was a way of punishing people who commit violent crimes. Recognizing that domestic violence survivors should be treated separately, treated differently, recognizing the mitigating factors, an exception was created, which said that people convicted of violent crimes who were survivors of violence should get an indeterminate sentence. Unfortunately, this exception doesn't work. It's being woefully underused. In 2007, the New York State Sentencing Commission found that one person had been resentenced, or had been sentenced under this DV exception, and he actually got longer than what he would have been able to get under the regular sentencing guidelines. Plus, he was denied parole twice before he came home. In 2009, the same Sentencing Commission found that 0 people were sentenced under this DV exception. Another reason that this exception doesn't work is that it only includes crimes where people have either committed assault or homicide directly against their abuser. So a situation where a woman is coerced to be a robbery lookout or to be a getaway driver because her abuser says, I'm going to kill your kids if you don't get in the car and make sure that you're there at the end of the robbery, those survivors would not be covered under the current exceptions. What our bill would do was make sure that other kinds of crimes, say you're coerced to holding drugs in your house by your abuser, say you're a robbery lookout, say you bought a gun and you're convicted of criminal possession of a weapon, all of those women would also be covered by our legislation. What else? What am I missing from this legislation? It would save the state a lot of money. It costs $55,000 to incarcerate an adult in New York State per year, whereas it costs $11,000 to incarcerate a person, well, to have someone be in an alternative to incarceration program. Not only for the money reasons, for basic human rights reasons too. Prisons are not exactly the place to heal from abuse and violence that you've experienced. Prisons are not the place where you can reunify with your family, to get the counseling that you need, that to deal with the issues or to avoid all these kind of collateral consequences that people with felony convictions have. Everything from being disenfranchised from voting, having a really difficult time getting housing, trying to deal with all the restrictions that parole have. They're just from the very beginning to the very end, the criminal justice system gives you barrier after barrier after barrier.